Let's talk about RBAC in Next.js, role-based access control, basically authorization. Right, so we have authentication, basically who is the user? The user is logged in as john@gmail.com, so we know who the user is. But now the second step is, maybe even more important, what does john@gmail.com have access to? So for example, let's say we have a support ticket system, and so users have a problem and they can submit a ticket. Right now I'm not logged in. If I try to go to the submit page, which I call submit ticket, if I try to go there, I will be redirected here to a login page hosted by Kind. So I'm gonna click on continue with GitHub and log in, right? So this is just basic authentication. After I log in, I'm getting redirected here to submit ticket. So now I am actually allowed to access this page, right? So here I'm logged in, we can see the email and also the role with which I'm logged in. So I call this a basic user. And here I can submit a ticket. And we also see that we are rendering a different nav bar depending on my authentication status. So I can submit a ticket here and request some support. So I'm gonna click on submit here and this will insert it into the database. Okay, so now I wanna see all the tickets that were submitted and I have that on the tickets page, which is not present here in the nav bar because this is a basic user and only support agents should be able to access the tickets page. So if I go here, if I try to go here, you can see my access here is denied because basic users can only submit tickets. They cannot view all the tickets that were submitted. Only a support agent can do that. So what I can do here in Kind, I can go to my users here. Kind has a really nice dashboard for roles and permissions. Here I have that user, I can click on the user and here under roles, you can see I created 2 roles here. So every user by default is going to be a basic user with certain permissions, but some of them are going to be support agents. So let me actually make this a support agent. I updated it here on the back end. And now you can see when I'm now signed in, I'm signed in with a role of support agent and suddenly I get access to the tickets route here where I did some testing here, but now you can see also this ticket I submitted, I accidentally submitted it twice, but you can see I can view all the tickets here and the support agent can also click on answer here and then actually answer the ticket, right? But the point here is only the support agent gets access to the tickets data, not basic users, right? So we're controlling the access of logged in users here. That's authorization, right? So that's the second step after authentication. Authentication, you could say, is the easy part. Authorization is in practice could actually be quite complicated, especially in a big project. You have a bunch of things that certain users simply should not have access to and other users should. So if we zoom out a little bit, this is one Next.js app, right? So Next.js has both a client side as well as a server side. I always show this graphic just so and people understand how Next.js is structured. Now, what do we really want to protect? Because yes, we can render a different UI, right? So we're going to render a different UI depending on the roles and permissions that the user has, but it's not the end of the world if we render a wrong button or something like that. However, it would be a big problem if, for example, a user has access to a server action that changes data in our database, right? So let me actually add a database here, right? So our data in a database is the most important thing we have, and we are accessing that from our server side, so in server components, server actions, and also these route handlers, but mostly in the Next.js app router in server components and server actions. So if we are changing data, which is the most valuable thing we have, so on the server side, you want to be very careful. And so here is where you're going to have additional authorization checks. And so that's primarily where we're going to be concerned with authorization. Now, in addition to that, we of course also want to make sure that we render a different UI depending on the roles and permissions that the user has, right? So we want to change the nav bar with the correct links because a basic user should not see this, right? Because they don't have access to it. So I'll quickly walk you through this example. I'm going to log out here and I'll show you exactly how I would do this. The sponsor of today is actually Kind, as you could guess. I'm actually a brand ambassador for them, which is a paid sponsorship, but I had a great time working with them so far. So you already saw the roles here, and that's actually just a way of grouping together permissions. Right, so we're going to have a couple of permissions. We're going to combine that into a role. That's essentially how it's going to work. Well, let me go back to a basic user here. And actually, let me actually delete this entire user. And let's start from absolute scratch. I'll go through it pretty quickly, but I will delete this user here. All right, let's quickly walk through the example. I just removed all the authentication, all the authorization as well from this app. So let's quickly see how this is structured, right? So here we have a home page. So here I have a home page, right? Very simple, sign in to submit a ticket. So they can submit a ticket here on the submit ticket page. And that is this page that we have right here. That's this one. That's what we see here. It's just a very simple form, right? Submit ticket, and here they can actually submit a ticket, right? So here we have a form with just basic elements here, and I can fill out my email, the actual content, and then I can actually submit it. Okay, now it is actually being submitted with a so-called server action. A server action is essentially a post API endpoint on your server side. So let me actually show you that one. That's this, right? Use server at the top. And here we are actually changing data in our database. We're actually adding something to our database, right? So this is a very important part because this is on the server side, and here we are actually working with our database, right? So here we want to make sure that users can only do this if they are authorized to do so. We'll take a look at that in a second. So that is the submit ticket page. Any authenticated user, anyone who's logged in, should be able to submit a ticket. Now we also have a tickets page right now where you can see all the tickets in the database, right? So these are all the tickets that are currently in the database, and the page for that is this one right here, right? So here in this component, we are getting all the tickets from the database, right? This is also a place where we're interacting with our database. Actually, very commonly, you want to get data in your server component. So this is again a place where we also want to be very vigilant on who is actually accessing that data. For viewing data, essentially here we're getting all the tickets from the database. That's like the view permission. Viewing a resource is mostly going to be done here in a server component. And updating data, basically your traditional post, put, delete request, you're going to do that with server actions these days. These route handlers are mostly useful for webhooks, but most of the critical interaction with your own database is going to happen in these two, right? So here we also want to make sure that only authorized users can actually view or get all the tickets from the database. Okay, so right now we have no protection. We don't even have any kind of authentication system. So I will very quickly add kind here to add authentication. So it's super easy. Here in my dashboard, I can just add an application here. I can call my app Next.js RBAC, and actually Next.js is more like a backend framework. It's full stack, but the backend carries a lot of weight, so we will go with that. And then here they have SDKs for Next.js as well. I have an existing one. My app is running on localhost 3000. Just need to set these two callback URLs and this one as well. Then we can add the package. I will open up my terminal and just paste that right there. Okay, so now we installed that kind package. I need to add the environment variables. I will add that here in .env.local. And the last thing is that we need to add the API endpoint that kind internally will use to make everything work. So I will copy this. I can just say new folder and that should work. Yeah. So in there we need a route.js. They use JS in the example. I will just copy that and paste that right here. Okay, so that is it for adding authentication, and then we can use a kind. So we would like to add a login or register button here in the header. So I will go to the header that I have here as a component. What am I doing in the header here, by the way? I just define all the routes that we have, right? We have 3 here. I define those right here, the label and the href. And then here, very simply, I'm just mapping over each one and creating an li. This should probably be an next link. Yeah, so now we can nicely navigate. Now on the right side, we want to have those auth buttons. And Kind actually has login and register components. So I just imported those, and I can even define after login where they should be redirected to. Make sure if you're following along that you get it from the correct path. So it needs to be this components path. So then let's actually try signing in. I'm going to click on sign in. So then this login page is hosted by Kind, and we can specify here how the user should be able to log in, right? So here we have all the options. So with email, code. Now here I'm just going to use the GitHub so that we do need to specify this. So now if I go back here and try again, now I can continue here with GitHub. So let's do that. And I haven't created an account yet, so it will ask me to create an account. All right. So now I'm redirected back here, and let's actually also display the information of the currently logged in user here in the header as well. So what we would like to do is something like this, where we can check if the user is logged in the header, and if they are, we want to render not the login and register buttons because the user is already logged in. We want to show their email, and we also want to show a logout component in that case. So how do we know if the user is logged in? How can we access that type of information? Well, anywhere on the server side, with kind, we can use this get kind server session, and it will give you all sorts of information. So whether the user is authenticated and also the user information itself. And it's a function that we can use everywhere on the server side. So in server components, server actions, route handlers. Now is authenticated is actually a function that we should call. So then we know if the user is logged in, but we also want to get their email. So we also have get user, which we can also call like this. If we do that, then we can see that we now have an email here and a logout button. Okay, but that's just displaying information. We are not protecting anything right now. So if I actually log out again, now I'm logged out, but I can still access submit tickets. I can still access tickets. So right now we're not protecting anything. So we only should be able to access this page if we are actually logged in. So let's start there. So I will go to that page. So how do we protect the route here? Well, we can do an authentication check like this. So very similar to what we just saw, we just grab the is authenticated. So if the user is not authenticated, we can simply redirect them to that API route that we just set up as well, basically passing off the user to kind, let kind deal with the user, which will just redirect them to the login page actually. And else, if the user is authenticated, we're just gonna render and return the page. And so now you can see actually it already works like that. So if I go to home, now if I try to go to submit ticket, I am being redirected here. If I now try to log in, and I should be redirected in case it's correct. Now after logging in, I can go to submit ticket again. So that's how we can protect a route with kind. We could also do it in middleware. I have other videos with kind, so make sure you check them out as well. Let's also add the same check to the tickets page. We only want support agents to access this page, but before we get there, we have step 1, which is essentially just authentication. So let's also do that for the tickets page right here. Here where we try to get all the tickets from the database, before we even try doing that, we want to make sure the user is even logged in. Right, so here we can quickly import this, and now we have the authentication check here as well. Okay, so now I'm logged in, and currently I can access the submit ticket page as well as the tickets page. So for submit ticket, this is what we want, right? So everyone who is logged in should indeed be able to submit a ticket. Right, so if I submit a ticket here, bob@gmail.com, laptop not working. Right, so remember what we are doing on this page is we are invoking a server action actually. Right, so here we have an action, create ticket. A server action is very similar to just like an API post endpoint on your server. So as I invoke that server action by submitting the form, let me actually show you what will happen. If I submit here, you can see there is actually a network request, a post to the same URL as which it's being invoked on, right? So the server action here is very similar to like an API endpoint. Now, technically, perhaps it's possible that somebody could just make a post request to this address here, to this URL, and invoke this logic here where we are actually interacting with our database, right? So here, very importantly, in server actions, you also want to add protection. So creating a ticket should only be able if you are actually logged in. And so we actually also want to add the authentication check to server actions, just like how you would traditionally do it with an API route. An API route should not be able to just be invoked by everyone, right? Only logged in users. So here we also want to add that first step, the authentication step. Now this is also server side, right? So we can just use the same logic. We can make a utility function out of this, but let's just do it like this. Okay, so that's all basic authentication. We have now submitted the ticket. Now I will try to go to the tickets page where we see all the tickets, which should not be possible because let's say that this is a basic user, right? Or not a support agent, right? So now let's talk about step 2, authorization. How can we make sure that only a support agent or somebody with the right permissions can access this route and view all the tickets? Well, Kind actually makes it very easy for us. So I can go to home here, I can go to settings here, and here Kind allows you to set up roles and permissions. Now Kind actually recommends that you mostly work with permissions, right? So typically what you're going to do is you're going to create a bunch of permissions. In a bigger app, you could have dozens or even hundreds of permissions, and then you can group them together into a role. And so let me show you what I mean. Let's start off with one permission here, right? So for example, a permission in our app could be creating tickets, right? So create tickets allows user to create ticket, right? And we can write it like this. So create : and then the resource. Let's say that, okay, that's one permission. We can have another one, right? Now let's say viewing all the tickets, right? So here, view all the ticket. I can say view or read tickets. Let's say view. That's another permission now. Another permission that we could have in our app is maybe answering tickets, right? So we could say something like answer ticket, to send an answer to a ticket, right? Something like that. Answer : tickets. And then let's say also deleting tickets, right? So these are some basic permissions to delete tickets, okay? So these are, let's say, 4 permissions that we have, like the most granular unit of authorization essentially. And now we want to group them together into a role, right? So we're going to have a basic user as well as a support agent. A basic user should only be able to create a ticket, but a support agent should also, well, essentially do everything here. They can view everything, they can delete, they can answer, and they themselves may also be able to create tickets. So that's what we want to set up here in roles. So we can add a role. We can say this is going to be a basic user with basic permissions, and we will call that basic-user. Now here kind also allows you to assign this to every new user. So every new one automatically gets this role. And then we have to specify which permissions this role gets, right? So here we have create ticket and all the other ones. So actually a basic user should only be able to submit a ticket, right? Only create one. And then we can save. Okay, so that's one role. Now the other role that we have in our app is an actual support agent, somebody who's going to be answering the ticket, right? Some role with more permissions. And we will call that support-agent, and very carefully, you don't want to assign this one to new users. Right? We could also call this an admin, right? Just some kind of more powerful user essentially. Let's say a support agent can also create tickets, why not, right? But a support agent can then also view all the tickets. And so we want to say view ticket and answer them, delete them. So basically all the permissions that we have. Okay, so now we have those 2 roles. So now we have set up all the roles and permissions that we're going to need. Now we want to make sure that this user right now is just a basic user, let's say. They should not be able to access tickets here and view all the tickets. So how do we now protect against that? Let's go to where we are doing that. Submit ticket page, well, that's fine. So let's go to the tickets page. So here right now, we are only checking if the user is actually authenticated, logged in. So now the second step is the authorization check. So now you can see before we get all the tickets, not only does the user need to be logged in, right? So if the user is not logged in, we already redirect to the login page. But here we have an additional check now. We are going to check if the user has that view ticket permission, right? So here we can use a get permission that we also get from this one function that you can use everywhere. And there's going to be some result from that check. So if the user hasn't been granted that permission, we're going to say access denied. So let's actually see if that works. If I save here, and now you can see when I try to go to /tickets, my access is denied because this user does not have the view ticket permission. Right, let me actually give that user that permission and see if we can still access that. So let's go to the users. So here I have that user, and here under roles, I can assign them a role. And actually it doesn't have any role yet because we already created this account before we added the roles. But let's say this user is actually a support agent, right? So I'm going to save here, and now this user has become a support agent in our app. Now, the way it works with tokens is that it doesn't immediately update with the latest data, right? So if you're familiar with JSON Web Tokens and how things work generally with that, you know, perhaps we just need to log in again so we get a new token with the latest information. Okay, and now I'm logged in, and you can see I can now access the tickets page, right? And if I make myself a basic user again, let me quickly do that as well. Now I'm going to log out and sign in again. Yeah, so now here I get access denied again. Right, it's a very easy way of doing the authorization check. We could also check for the role instead. And so here I'm checking very specifically for viewing tickets. We can also check if they have a role of support agent. I'll show you that in a second. Let's quickly add the authorization check for the other page as well, right? So we also have a permission for submitting tickets, creating tickets. I think it makes sense that we also add that here, right? So here I'm going to check if the user has the create tickets permission. Okay, so those are the 2 routes. Now, remember, we want to be very careful with server actions as well. So here we don't only want to check if the user is authenticated, we also want to do that same authorization check. And actually here we want to redirect. Right, so we want to check here because maybe later our app changes a little bit and we will have different users. So maybe a user can be logged in, but they shouldn't be able to create a ticket, for example. So you just want to get those authorization checks in there as soon as you have your permissions and roles. And only after that are we actually going to update database, right? So you want to be very careful with your data, and you want to have all the checks finished by the time you get to that point. So that should be your primary focus, protecting the data. Now, we of course also want to render a different UI depending on the permissions that the user has. So if I log out here, right, so here I should not be able to see these two links here because if I'm not logged in, I cannot go to those pages. And if I am logged in, I should not be able to see tickets here unless I'm actually a support agent or I have certain permissions. So let's actually go to the header. So here in the header, I have these routes in an array here. It just makes it a bit easier to map over them later and render the correct route. So maybe we can add some additional information here. For example, maybe the required permissions that the user should have in order to access the route, or just maybe one required permission, creating ticket. Or maybe we want to check by role, right? We can also check for the role. We'll show you that in a second. But let's say the user needs to have some required permission. So then when we map over the route, we need to check if the user has that required permission. So we need to know all the permissions that the user has. So I can use get permissions here that we're getting from that function, and will give me all the permissions that the user has. So then here when we map over those routes, we can quickly add an if check here. So if the route does not have any required permission, like the home page, then it's like a public route, right? So then we will simply render the li. But if the route does have a required permission like read ticket, we need to check if the user has that read ticket permission, right? So we need to check if that array of permissions includes that required permission. Okay, so now if I go back here, you can see I'm not logged in, so I don't see those two other links. But now let's say I sign in, and remember I'm a basic user, so I can only create tickets. I cannot view them. So we should only see the create ticket URL. All right, so now you can see we see submit ticket here. We do not see tickets. If I quickly make myself a support agent again and quickly log in and out, I actually do not see tickets here because this, so this should be view tickets, not read. It's very similar. But you can see when I'm actually a support agent, I do see tickets here and all the other ones. Now, it would also be nice if we can see the role of the user, because maybe you want to check by role, not by permission. So we want to get the role of the user from the token with which they're logged in. So in kind, I do need to go to my application here, view details, tokens, and here I can customize what's going to be in the access token. And so by default here, not everything is included. So I can add the roles like this and also other properties if I want them. So if I add those in the token, I can save here. I can go to my code, and here I can get all the roles of the user. So for example, if I wanted to protect some route based on the role, I could do result.value. I can just check if one of the roles that the user has is actually support agent, let's say. And if it's not true, their access would be denied. But let's say we just want to display the role the user is currently logged in with. I just have to change one small thing here. Yeah, so here I'm just mapping over each role. Now here initially it will not exist because my token is still outdated. So I need to log out and sign in again for it to actually have those roles, or role in our case. I can add this back again. And now you can see I'm logged in with role support agent, right? So this is how you can access the actual role of the user. Maybe you prefer it that way, right? So also a quick note about revoking access, right? So imagine you have an admin user. An admin user could be very powerful, but let's say that person is not doing a good job of they're actually causing problems, and you want to go to that user, right? And you want to revoke their role as an admin or support agent, and you just want to make them basic user again. And so revoking access like that, it may take some time before that actually is reflected here, because these access tokens do not immediately update, right? So you want to make sure that you are aware of these auth strategies that you can pick, right? So there's a database session strategy. In that case, on every request, you're making a round trip to the database to check if the user is logged in and has access. In that case, you're always getting the latest data, so you can easily revoke access. However, typically with a JSON Web Token strategy, you're not going to make a round trip to your database. So in this case, the access token, it basically contains all the information to make that decision. And so if you change something on the back end, well, the token here is still the same. So it's not going to be updated. It may take 10 minutes or so before you're actually going to get a new one with a refresh token in order for that to be reflected here. Right, so that's something you want to pay attention to as well. In any case, I hope that this helps you with implementing roles and permission in your Next.js app. I want to thank Kind for sponsoring this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.